friend on Facebook said, I can't make it to the talk, but I'm dying to hear the answer. I said, yikes, I'm just sharing an exploration. So thank you, Todd, and thank you all for coming, and for those online. And I'd like to just also thank IonE not only for the opportunity to speak, but also for the support they've given this work over time, from an early mini grant for a pilot, as well as exhibiting the first pilot in the Commons, and now through my fellowship supporting this new pilot. So with that, in the first pilot at a preschool, I asked, in a pretest, I asked the children about their water knowledge. And I showed them a picture of their classroom sink and wondered if they knew where their water came from. And this was a pretty typical answer of the 4 to 6 year old. This 5-year-old said, the ocean maybe? So I think this is not too surprising. Many of the parents, teachers, and many people I run into don't know where their water comes from, depending on where they live. Maybe some of you in this room are the exception to the rule. So, you know, is it a problem? I think even for the children who love nature, who do not feel two with nature, who feel one with nature when they're out in the parks that they explore, may still not feel that connection when they're inside in their classroom at the sink, making decisions about water use. And so that's what this work is aimed at addressing, this kind of connection with nature throughout one's day and throughout one's life, not just when you're out in a pristine wilderness or even a local park. And part of the reason for addressing this is not just for well-being or all the benefits of connection to nature that you've probably heard about, but it's also that it's considered, I think, almost just an accepted truth in sustainability discussions that we have to start with this concept of interdependence. We can't remain in our command and control kind of attitude if we're going to find solutions that stick, that are sustainable, and that we need to really, you commonly hear the 3 E's, economy, ecology, equity, and the 3 P's, people, profit, planet. But basically this idea of interdependence is very ingrained in sustainability thinking. However, as when we stand at the sink or turn on a light switch, we don't experience that day to day usually. That interdependence is not, that attitude is not the way our world was really designed, or that we have designed our environments. And so I'm inspired by David Suzuki, an environmental educator, and he and many others are essentially calling for a new story, a story of interconnection, or what he's saying is a continuum, which is maybe even a deeper connection than interdependence. And that we really need to work at this kind of cultural narrative level to tell a new story of how we fit into the world, so that this abstract idea of our interdependence becomes more of an embodied and lived experience of the world. I'm also influenced by Danelle Meadows, and she has this article, famous article she wrote, Places to Intervene in a System. She's a great systems thinker, looking at how we work in a systems mindset to solve the world's problems. And at the bottom of her top 10 list of places to intervene in a system, she had things like rules and regulations. If you move up the list, you get information feedback loops. But at the top of her list, she had paradigm, and really says that paradigms are the sources of systems. It affects everything. So that if, without even realizing it, we think some people are more important than other people, that affects everything in the system. Or if we think the world was made for humans, or have certain attitudes about what species are important, that affects everything. And so I'm interested in addressing paradigm through the idea of story. And Jonah Sachs, in this article in State of the World, and also in his newer book, The Story Wars, talks about the importance of storytelling to change behavior. And storytelling, he points out, is used extensively in marketing and advertising. And the people that make Marlboro cigarettes, for example, are very wise to the idea of story and how to tap into the idea of story to create the idea that you need to buy something or do something or have something to live out the story that they are suggesting you should. And so the goal of the work I'm doing is really to kind of tap into this idea of paradigms as a high leverage design strategy for healing the disconnect and other ills of the world, and use art and story, these kind of classic cultural tools, to do that. So the design approach is really to start with where people are. In the first pilot here in Little Canada, Minnesota, in the preschool, the students were at their sink when I asked that question about where the water comes from. Well, this is where their water comes from, is upriver at the Mississippi, and this is where it goes, down at the wastewater treatment plant. But of course, they didn't know that, their teachers didn't know that, their parents didn't know that. We don't tend to pay attention to those things unless maybe we work for a utility. But in order to create a sense of greater interconnection, I'm trying to create experiences that kind of connect these dots. So in the first pilot, at the same time I was piloting a process, I was kind of incubating a model, Earth Systems Journey. And basically this approach, which I'll give you an example of shortly, and show you its components, it's sort of just plain language. It's just a special journey designed for engagement, starting from a place of personal experience, such as a classroom sink, following a flow of interest, such as water, to its source and destination as far as you can, so that when you return to that place, for example, the sink, your view of it is transformed by knowing the larger story of water, in this case, that runs through it, and the places and people and natural elements that live in relationship to it. There's three main characteristics of the Earth Systems Journey. One is engaging with infrastructure, and the reason for that is partly because infrastructure, in a sense, I think is part of the problem of the disconnect. Of course, infrastructure, piped water, running water in our homes, this is a wonderful accomplishment of modern life, but it comes with this cost, in a way, of, as in the introductory paragraph of the talk, I mentioned we don't gather water from the stream anymore. We just turn on the tap. The technology has allowed the natural resources that feed our lives to be invisible. And so, as Harold Braun points out, our lives are so mediated by technology that it seems as if technology is responsible, as if the engineers created water and delivered it through the sink, even if we abstractly know that it comes somewhere from nature. Now, this technological division between everyday life and natural systems doesn't just divide our experience into two, it actually divides our concept of natural resources into two. I would argue. Ivan Illich in H2O in the Waters of Forgetfulness talks about there being two different kinds of water. There's the water of dreams, which you find in streams and rivers and waterfalls, the kind of iconic water in nature that we have a certain kind of relationship with and perception of, and another kind of water, this industrial product called H2O that comes out of the tap. Most people, as they run the tap, do not have that experience of being by a water body in nature. And in a sense, even though in reality this is the same water, albeit cleaned and treated on its way, we experience it as entirely two different entities. So the work is interested in taking the infrastructure that historically has been a barrier to perceiving our interconnection, and through engaging with it and interpreting it, transform it into a bridge that connects us back to these natural resources. Another characteristic of the Earth Systems Journey is specificity to place. Many of you might be familiar with place-based environmental education that really advocates for people working in their school or in their local environment to yield attachment and engagement and interact in the world in a very relevant way. This builds on that tradition. But it also takes another angle on it, which is that place-based work in nature, let's say in a park or a local stream, connects you to that place, and place-based work in your school, let's say a water conservation campaign or a turn out lights campaign, connects you there. But this doesn't necessarily do anything to address this divide between these two parts of the world. And so what I'm trying to do in Earth Systems Journey is to design a journey that connects people across places and really say it's this path is the focus of the place-based work. You could call it path-based work, to show the connection between the human-made world and the more natural environment. So the third main strategy of Earth Systems Journey is narrative aesthetic experience. It sounds kind of like a strange word. Another way to think of it is ritual, although ritual evokes maybe something a little more, I don't know, religious or something, but it's really the idea of interacting with some kind of story or narrative using aesthetic means. So in the same way that we have cultural traditions that use art and music, or there's rituals around birth or death, or people go on pilgrimages to visit sacred sites or the home of their favorite author. There's something about engaging with the senses that engages you with a story in a different kind of way. And more particularly, our systems journey builds on this idea of the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell described as a pattern that occurs across cultures and across time. You probably recognize it if you don't already know it, that basically the hero protagonist starts in the ordinary world, living their everyday life, has some kind of call to adventure, maybe resists the call, meets some kind of guide, goes through a process of preparation, and then crosses the threshold into the special world of adventure, has challenges. The call to adventure is something that gave them the idea they needed to attain something out here. There's some reason they were drawn out here. And so in trying to attain that thing, whether it's the Holy Grail or the answer to life's mysteries, they go out in the world until they attain it, and then they return back to community with something to offer community and some change in themselves. And this pattern not only is in literature and plays and throughout time, but it's also the structure of a number of pilgrimages too. There's some hardship, there's some destination. And so this is one of the underlying principles behind the system journey. So here's an example, the first pilot, Downstream Upstream, that in which I will show you kind of how the ideas lay into it. But the underlying structure, of course, was not explicit. We didn't tell preschoolers, you're now having a call to adventure. They were just on a water journey, you know. But there's design principles behind it, I guess, was what I was trying to say. So it's sort of simplest description. Downstream Upstream was a 2-week journey with 39 kids, ages 4 to 6, from their preschool kindergarten in Little Canada, through the urban water cycle, upstream and downstream, following the water infrastructure that connects the river to their sink. There was a huge team. Many of them were in the room. Thank you. And I won't go through all of them, of course, but I just want to point out that it takes a lot of people to do a journey like this, because we're crossing boundaries of expertise, of knowledge, of facilities operated by different organizations. And so this is inherently an interdisciplinary, collaborative project, and that's actually one of the benefits of participating in this, is that all these people get to work together on something. So now we've got the 3 circles I showed you earlier, with a little bit more detail in between the steps of the journey and where they went. I'll get into the details of all the locations, but basically this was the actual, and it was important that this not just be an example of water treatment, but this is the actual place. It's different here than it would be down here. So these students are going on an authentic personal journey of water as if they're walking up riverbanks to try to find the headwaters of their sink. And now, to show how this plays out with Earth System's journey, you'll recognize this from Hero's Journey. So this is Earth System's journey, strongly based on the Hero's Journey, with student, participant, heroes, protagonists, what have you, in their home place, their school, even more specifically, a specific place within that familiar location, their sink. So we don't have a kind of general idea of all the sinks, toilets, genders, closets, and so forth, but we choose a particular iconic location so they have a strong image of where the journey begins. And then they go on this same journey, like the hero, to find the Holy Grail, which for them is the answer to where does the water come from and where does the water go. That's the quest. And so this preparation phase is there to build anticipation, excitement, get the equipment, get the background knowledge going. And I'm mostly going to go through this because of time as a montage, but I'll pause at a few points to highlight some things. So, there's a pretest. I'm pausing here right away because we're talking about art and story. And so in the preparation phase, a lot of the artistic aspects of the project are set up. And by art, I don't mean that we're creating a great artwork or the children are creating some kind of giant mural or something. Really, the primary role of art in this project is the designed experience. But there are also many created objects in the project that, first and foremost, serve as props in this larger play, in a sense. But they also have their own form. So there's a giant 8-foot by 8-foot map in the hallway of the school to create excitement, and also as a launch pad for the journey and a reference point. We would gather here each day and say, okay, today we're going here, and what do you think we're going to find? And special equipment, the kiddie cameras, so they can help tell the story of water. They decorated water bottles because these were going to be used as kind of ritual objects throughout the journey. And teachers did many spin-off activities, learning about the water cycle. You'll see some unusual versions of the water cycle here, upside down and sideways, but they're getting the idea of these connections. And there's a poem and song for the project that tells the kind of, almost like the legend of the water source. So it has instrumentation that was a collaboration with the music teacher. The children learn to sing it. They get a CD to take home and practice. So all these become props in a kind of theatrical experience they're going to embark on. Go back to montage here. I'm pausing here because one thing I wanted to point out is that unlike the hero's journey, where often the hero at this point, kind of the opposite end of the familiar home place, they might be in a castle fighting a dragon or whatever Bilbo Baggins does when he's out of his little hole in the ground. But in an Earth System's journey, what's different is that the students are actually back in their school at this point. So the peak of the journey, or sort of the midpoint of the journey, is in their own place of familiarity. In a sense, that is because where the water comes from and goes, the kind of surprise grail in this is to find themselves in the middle of a larger story. They're midstream of this larger flow of water. They're being woven into the story of the water cycle. Okay, you'll notice some of the author or artists of the various photographs were children. I don't know if you know which were which, but so they were definitely integral in telling the story of the water. At this point, this is the stage of arrival. Those water bottles that they decorated and they're collecting and releasing water throughout. This is kind of the final ceremonial end of the other world of the water before they return back home. Again, so they're doing their final pouring of the water into the river at the outflow channel, that point where the wastewater treatment plant returns the water to the river. And they're, this is, again, the art strung throughout. So they're singing the song and doing the hand motions on the boat as they go back upstream. And then I pause here because this whole story then gets incorporated into custom water journey books. There are common chapter headings and reference maps that they all use, but all of the photographs then get put into these books. There's interactive activities, make it rain, and so it becomes their own record of the journey. And then this is a tool when they go home to their parents and their relatives, they tell the story of their water journey. We learn about stewardship actions, take stewardship actions, and that concludes then the journey where they have completed this cycle and brought back their knowledge into insights to community and then express that through stewardship actions in community. So, as I mentioned, this starts from a goal of an interconnected paradigm, and I think I said at the beginning of the project that of all the possible outcomes, the one that's in a way most important to me is if the student stands at the sink and turns the tap on and thinks about, not only knows that that comes from the river, but has had a personal experience, so they feel that connection. They feel as if they're in the midst of this larger flow of water. Of course, there's other geography, water, literacy kind of outcomes that go along with this. So that was the first pilot. And there was another smaller pilot at a public school for a second grade class. And the one I'm going to talk about next is River Journey. We've got a pending project that'll be at the U if it comes through. But I'll just quickly now go through the current pilot that's underway. So this pilot is at a charter high school. It's a charter environmental high school called Rivers Edge Academy. And it's grades 9 through 12. There's about 70 students. And they're particularly oriented around environmental education and experiential learning. They're affiliated with outward bound and expeditionary learning methodologies. They're located, not only do they have a perfect curricular theme for compatibility with Earth Systems Journey, but they also have a perfect location. They're a short walk to Harriet Island, which is really a wonderful asset for them. And as I mentioned, it's made possible for Institute in the Environment and the in-kind support of many groups, including U Spatial at the U, who are providing inspiration, training, and support to use GIS story maps. The students came to the U and learned how to make story maps. We're going to continue to use that throughout the year. And the National Park Service, not only doing their normal river education, but River's Edge Academy is one of the designated kind of adopted schools, I guess you'd say, for the MPS Centennial. So we're getting added support from Brian, thank you. And many others. There's a lot of in-kind time represented here and access to facilities. As a one-year pilot, we're trying to pack in a lot more. So we had our, probably too much, but we had our exploration fieldwork, this kind of tracing the flow of water in fall, and I'll show you that in the form of a story map in a minute, that was created then. Kind of parallel to the children's journey books, the story map becomes a more grown-up version for the high schoolers that also then can be displayed publicly as an information source. And then very excited that coming this winter, spring, the teachers are going to incorporate river themes into their core content classes, which will be wonderful. And we'll be doing more story maps, and then tentatively a rain garden installation. And then the final presentation and publication at the graduation, which will be on the showboat, just for nice atmosphere to include. So I'm not going to go into this. These are just many of the parts, and I'm just going to mention that there's more than I have shown or will show. There's the kind of core aesthetic, narrative aesthetic journey that's in blue, in the art parts, but the teachers then build off of this core of meaning and do lots of interactive work alongside this. And there's other parallel river trips. So there's a lot going on. This is just a part of it. So, as with downstream, upstream, there's an opening poem. We didn't set this one to music, but talks about the source of water, and well, maybe just to change up the basis speaking. I'll just read it, or can you read it? I'll just read it. From the sky there comes a storm, causing thunderclouds to form. Lightning flashes like the sun. Rain falls down on everyone, making puddles for the toads, cleaning up the dirty roads. From the land the water flows, and the Mississippi grows. It's water flowing from the earth. How do we know the river's worth? At river's edge we watch the stream and hear the stories waters dream, passing through the gills of fish, then cleaned and piped to wash our dish. Sacred, common, safe to drink, what is flowing in our sink? Symbolic of our own rebirth, please speak a word for water's worth. This was presented at Opening Circle on the first day of school and spoken by myself and the other teachers as kind of an initiation into the project. As with downstream, upstream, they got water bottles, except in this case, they're collecting a little bit from each location. This is at River Park, across the river from the intake. They're writing on the bottles words of value. So they delabeled the original water bottles that say clean spring water, pure, that sell water bottles. They've taken those labels off, and they're essentially relabeling this and repackaging river water as they go along, kind of reinterpreting what is the story of the water. And then there's labels on here with them looking at the river and doing couplet responses to the poem. There's lots of layers for expression. And then at the mid-year celebration of learning, students presenting the story map to, in this case, a new teacher, which brings me to the story map, which is the best way to tell the story of what we've experienced. Okay, so for those of you not familiar with the story map, it's a great software created by Esri, who's a GIS giant. And this is a very user-friendly format for using map-based information and map-based communication. So basically there's different kinds of story maps, but they all interact with maps. So this is actually a live map that you can move around in like Google Maps. And then there's a story about their journey. And as you scroll through the story, the maps change to help you tell the story. So We start with an aerial view. We go into just describing where they went. And you can see here there's the locations they went to. And as you scroll through, each location has a kind of general introduction. So here's River Park, where they were first collecting water, and a little bit about that. And then we get into River Park Journal. This is not maybe an ideal screen format for this, but where you can see pictures that students have chosen to respond to. These flowers are in the stormwater demonstration park here. This is where they collected water. And I've done kind of visual journal, nature journal type notebook reflections about what they saw, what they learned, what it meant to them, working on the themes of ecology, economy, and community. So you get to see the different voices of the students and what they noticed and what insights they had. And it becomes not only, I think if they just did this on a piece of paper and turned it in, they might not take it quite as seriously, but by knowing it's going to be published online, I think it kind of elevates the value of their voice, which I think is good. And it also makes a much more interesting website for the public to look at, to see the different voices of the students and what they notice. Because in a sense then, the retelling of their story becomes another story, and they are the protagonists, and people can watch them discover them through the map online. Aspect ratio thing going on. Basically, that's how it works. And go back to this and back up here. And he's just doing the story map. So that's basically the overview. We're kept in time and open up for questions. In a sense, that was the challenge of the second pilot I didn't show you, which was called April Showers, Storms, and Flowers. And it was a pilot with a second grade classroom in a regular old public school, not charter school, not the free-form private preschool. So they had all the standards to meet, all the time pressures. And you know, I don't know that the experience was as broad and deep as going to visit the river, but what we did is we did a stormwater journey. We traced the rain from the roof down the downspout. We traced the stormwater drains and traced those underground to the pond that happened to be on site. A little bit of an advantage there. And I brought in, I had a very willing second grade teacher, that was essential. And I brought in the local watershed educator and the stormwater superintendent from the city, who had actually attended second grade in that same room, which was really eerie. He's probably in retirement now, but and they gave that kind of depth of background. So he brought in maps of the storm system. You wouldn't believe how second graders want to know what all the symbols mean on those maps. And I brought in the cameras, and they took pictures and documented it. So there was a journey within the bounds of the school grounds, and they happened to have a pond there. But I think it was still did a lot of that, transition from the built environment to the natural environment. We talked about where it goes after that. So there's a lot of environmental education that just happened on a pretty average school ground. So that's one approach. Of course, other approaches that a lot of people are working on is more advocacy and research-based advocacy on why people have to get out into the outdoors. Does that answer your question? There's a lot that can happen on school ground. Yeah, the evaluation and research on student experience, I have not been able so far to set up long-term impacts. I did evaluation on downstream, upstream of students using a couple of different methods, but we had a pre, mid, and post-test that was expressed in the form of a water game, so not too threatening, but basically getting at, well, like that one example of the sink, where does the water come from? Different questions like that about their emotional attachment to water, about their water knowledge, and before and after, and then sort of categorizing responses of, what do they mention and where does water come from? Well, they start out mentioning very generally someplace in the world that has water, and when they're done, they know about the intermediate infrastructure. But in terms of evaluation like connectedness to nature, things like that, working towards that. With the high school, it's got a little bit more about identification as a nature steward, or is the Mississippi River a big part of your life? So working on that, haven't figured out the longitudinal aspect yet, though, but I would love to. Thanks. Yeah, I've had adults ask to go on one. In fact, some of the parents took off of work to go with their kids because they wanted to see what was inside the water tower. But, yeah, I think there is other interest. And in terms of plans, right now it seems more obvious to people, I think, as an educational activity, but I think nature center is open to multi-ages or faith-based organizations. Really, I think anyone, like you say, might be interested and could benefit from having an experience like that. So following the interest. Yes, Todd, thanks. In fact, it was explicitly, way back when I did the first pilot, before I got some sanity and narrowed it down to water, I thought about doing energy, materials, and air, and kind of all the elements, if you will. But, and it's intended to be compatible with that. And I actually started exploring a related project that tries to get people engaged with the electric grid, for example, and take trips out. Not that there's a single source, but to take trips out to representative power plants and to really start at the light switch and travel out. So yes, definitely have that in mind. I have not been able to implement it yet. Yeah, well, I haven't really compared two methods, but I guess I believe that we need all our ways of knowing to understand things completely. And so it's based on, and I think also this is maybe more about the behavior side, but Christy Manning's work on the psychology of behavior change, for example. There's this rational side of your brain and this, I don't know, reptilian or whatever, she calls it the Homer Simpson side of your brain, that basically looks to see what everyone else is doing and responds to aesthetic cues and responds to image and story. And so certainly for behavior change, I think that's effective. But also, yeah, I guess I believe it's got an added way of understanding spatially. Yeah. I've tried with evaluation, and so there's lots of ways to measure the impact. I was use one example of feedback from I think it was a grandparent of one of the preschoolers that went on the first journey. She actually took the time to write a letter to the school thanking them for doing the water journey, and said that her son is so excited about water. When they go to the Science Museum, he tells her all about how the water system works. And so that kind of, or another impact I think of, which I don't know how to describe this, but shortly after the project, I went out in the playground and the kids were digging in the sand. They said, "We're digging for the pipes." I don't know if the pipes were right there, but they had this fascination that there was something underground going on. It wasn't just this plain, that grass sits on top of. And so, yeah, I think, so many of the impacts are qualitative. I've done some quantitative, what do they know about the intermediate systems and things like that. So I'm still exploring, you know, the different ways of exploring the impacts and how best to do that, because there's many types of impacts. Policy change, yeah. Well, the first one about behavior change at home. I asked some questions of parents. I had parent questionnaires too. I teacher, community partner, parent, and student questionnaires, and it was a little hard to say. I mean, there's certainly attitudes had improved, but actual behavior change or water saving, I can't say that I can answer that very well yet. And in terms of policy change, one of the places I presented this was at the American Public Works Association Minnesota chapter with Bill Dirks, the fellow from the city of Little Canada. And you know, he thought this was a great way, because they're struggling to make the argument that we need to invest in infrastructure, for example. And so even on just kind of the technological side, I think appreciating our infrastructure can help inform the public, make policy change that way. But also on the natural environment side, well, one of the comments I had from an earlier presentation on this was, we should send other politicians on one of these. I'm ready. So, but yeah, so I hope it could have some impact on that. Right. Well, yeah, we were very intentional. I mean, actually, before this program started, I remember going to that preschool and seeing on the board they had done finger paintings of the Gulf oil spill. I thought, really? They've touched that? You know, it seemed kind of harsh for a preschool. But, you know, I think it's generally agreed that you don't want to lay too much on a preschooler, but you can lay the foundations for caring, and you can talk about things they can act on, like picking up trash, which isn't going to solve these dire emergencies, but it'll help set the stage of a stewardship identity. At the high school level, they're talking about people that don't have enough water to drink. I mean, they're engaging with the dire questions. And so I think the role of a project like this is to create a kind of experiential stage set to talk about whatever issues are appropriate to the level that the students are at, and appropriate to the programming that the school or whatever other organization we do it at want to address, and those issues then can be folded into this kind of experiential project. I mean, this project doesn't necessarily propose solutions to environmental problems. It proposes a kind of approach to thinking about our place in them all. And perhaps if it provides a little humility about the part of this larger thing, that might be a good thing in terms of how we approach solutions, in my own opinion. Yeah. Yeah, the idea is to go as far as you can. Like the other example of staying on the school grounds. Ideally, if we had more time in that project, we would have had either a student or a teacher or some kind of agent go on and send back pictures from following the pipes down to the river, kind of like adventure learning, or where someone goes to the polarized caps and communicates with students. I could imagine with the coffee example, connecting with schools where the coffee is grown and having those students take pictures and communicate to try to get that sense. You can't maybe travel there, but maybe you can relate to it on the ground as a specific place with specific people. Now, some would say, well, if you can't get to the real water plant, why not go to another one? That actually came up on the first project. We're having logistical problems with timing, getting the students to their actual wastewater treatment plant. And the educator there suggested, well, I think you could get better access to this other one. And I felt like, no, it's very important to go to the real one. This is the path of their wastewater. This is where their dirty stuff is going. And so at least in my thinking in this model, it's more important to take the authentic path as far as you can go. Not that it wouldn't be interesting to see a similar plant, than to use a similar example. So in the case of the first pilot, we ended up actually just going to the parking lot and looking at the wild industrial landscape and playing a wastewater treatment game where kids got to be sludge and grit and things. And so, you know, we could only get to the parking lot, but we were there. We were at the real place where it happened. So I mean, that's a judgment call of what one tries to accomplish. I would say the idea of this model is that connection with what's real. And so even if it's virtually or through communication with others online, I think that has value to trace that. That relates to the other pilot I didn't show, which is a thank you, which is a pending one.
We did practice that.
Yeah, but the one that's coming up, it just needs legislative approval. LCCMR funded water journey camps at the U is set up to create a toolkit. I mean, literally a toolkit with cameras and learning modules and training. And I wouldn't actually be delivering it. There would be teachers that would then come in and run the camps multiple times. I'd observe and be part of the team with my team the first year and learn from and refine. But the idea then is that it would run. So.